We are covering chapter 2 today in the text, and lesson 2 is the overview of all of the laws in the United States. We might touch on some laws in other countries just to compare what we have here, but these are the ones we need to know to operate in the United States. These are the big ones. I mean, there may be other laws for your state or for your industry, but these are the ones that affect everyone. Affect everyone as a customer, affect everyone as a business. So we need to know these. These are the big ones. If you know these laws, you can carry on a conversation about regulation with just about anybody. We're going to hit the highlights of these. Some of these laws are thousands and thousands of pages. We're just going to capture the big highlights of these laws, the things you have to watch out for. The other thousands of pages go into detail on how to be compliant with the laws. So at the end of the chapter, we need to have a goal of being able to explain specific compliance laws and how they affect your organization. And the projects we have in the future, you saw in Project 1, Chapter 1, we have a company that wants to go into business processing credit cards. Well, what are we going to have to do to be able to do that? We're going to go over PCI DSS in this chapter too, so we can find out some of those pieces of information that you may need to let an organization know that you're consulting for what they need to do. We're moving more into a culture of, I think they call it the gig economy, where you don't have a job or a career in the same with the same employer for long periods of time. Now we're getting into a place where you might move from job to job, or you might just do consulting, where you just start a business interpreting these laws for companies. You'll be like a digital priest, go to you when they need advice for things. So that's the goal of this chapter, is to be able to get an overview, and for you to be able to speak with somebody intelligently about these regulations. There's going to be some difference between whether you work for the public sector and the private sector. Especially dealing with the federal government. There's some laws, if we do business with the federal government, we need to be able to understand before we start doing business with the federal government. There's all kinds of regulations, and DOD has actually published more and more information for guidance for companies that want to do business with the federal government. Okay. We're also going to talk about certification and accreditation. This is pretty interesting. Basically, what you have to do is, instead of having audits that tell you what happened in the past, certification and accreditation have to do with making sure a system is suitable before you turn it on. So you can't even use a system until it's been certified. We see this in the pharmaceutical industry, and I'll talk more about that when we get to that section. Jamie, anytime you have a question, just pipe in. I don't care. I'm going to go ahead and put the participants thing up. If you want to ask me a question, just stop me if you have a question about one of the regulations, or you have a question about anything. I don't have a problem with that. So when we're dealing with these requirements for these regulations, trouble comes from two directions. One is that we're not lawyers. Okay, you can make a lot of money if you get a degree in IT and then you get you pass the bar exam, right? Any kind of crossover from one industry to another, where you have multiple disciplines, you're going to make a lot of money. That's especially true right now. If I have a degree in nursing and a degree in IT, that's big money. So most people don't have the legal background. And we're just giving you a crash course in the legal background in this class. It's just so that you can help other people. Um, the regulations that they put in place are written by lawmakers, and the lawmakers are not IT personnel. We've probably seen that when we looked at this. They haul Twitter and Facebook in front of Congress, and it just makes the politicians look stupid. You've got the guy that runs Facebook and the guy that runs Twitter just running rings around the congressman, because the congressmen don't have any idea what's going on. They try to ask them. They read questions from IT people, but they don't have a real grasp on IT. So these regulations will be broad meaning not very specific. They'll be vague. So what we typically have to do is, as an industry, come up with a common set of understanding, and this is what the law means, and those types of deals. We also need to look at precedents in legal decisions to find out how to interpret laws, because the judge is always going to rely on the previous judge when you go to court. So that's where these troubles come from. We're not lawyers, and the politician that write the laws that the lawyers litigate are not IT people, right? The regulation requirements are very vague. When we talk about the red flags rule, it doesn't really specify anything. Just that you have to, set up a system to monitor identity theft, right? The other problem we get into is we have requirements at different levels. So we have international requirements we might have to follow. We have federal, and then we have state. And then if we have a company that's doing business in different states, the laws are different. So how do you have a common framework for a company that does business where there's different laws in different states? An example would be the California breach notification law, right? If you have any customers, it don't matter whether they bought a t-shirt off of your website one time and you get hacked, you have to notify them or California will come after you, right? So we need to know those things. So we have trouble coming from that direction. We need to know which regulations apply to your organization. As we go through them, you'll find out that multiple laws are going to regulations are going to apply to your industry. Internal policy should execute the policies to which you need to comply. So we're going to have guidelines and regulations from the government, and then we're going to have internal documents that tell us how to implement those policies and procedures. And we need to make sure that our employees are following them. First one we're going to talk about is FSMA. Have you heard of FSMA at all? You may have heard of the Rainbow books. That was the old system. FSMA is made by the federal government, and it has prescriptions on how to do business and be secure. It applies to all federal agencies. So that would be FEMA, that would be Homeland Security, Department of Defense, the FDA. All of those agencies are governed by FSMA. This regulation is going to control the interest of national security and the well-being of the United States. So it's going to make sure that we're doing what we need to do to stop China from encroaching on our networks and figuring out our information, right? So FSMA is not really prescriptive about what we need to do. It's a framework. And the federal government and FSMA tasks the NIST, which is another federal agency, for coming up with these procedures and guidelines. So anytime we want to be in regulatory compliance with FSMA, we need to look at NIST documents. The ones we're going to be interested in is the 800 regulations, NIST 800, and those have to do with IT security. It recognizes that we're going to be connected to other agencies and to the public. And this FISMA regulation is based on risk, right? We talked about that risk management framework. So what we're going to do is look at the risk of doing certain things and decide whether we want to do them or not. And then putting this on paper ensures the coordination of the civilians, the national security, and law enforcement. Everybody's going to be on the same page because we wrote down what we expect, right? And that's what a policy does. So that's what FISMA does. It also gives us a framework for monitoring or auditing our systems. It gives the federal government or the federal agency the legal right to do oversight. Right? If we don't have a precedent, we don't have a piece of paper saying that we can do something, then according to the federal government, we can't. So it charges the federal government and gives them power to oversee all of those security programs. It knows that different agencies are going to have different needs. The FDA is going to use different computers than the Department of Homeland Security. It recognizes that. So what it's going to do is it's going to leave getting those pieces of equipment. It's going to leave those decisions to the agencies. Remember, it's a framework. It doesn't tell us every single thing we need to do. Those agencies are going to have to make their own internal policies concerning those devices and those equipment purchases that they buy. The Department of Defense is responsible for all agencies of the government relating to national security and the military. So the Department of Defense is going to do those audits. The Department of Defense is going to be responsible for monitoring all of the other agencies. It's going to impose requirements on the management of the information systems. And then these requirements, remember, are going to apply to contractors. So if you have DoD contractors, then the requirements are going to require the contractors also to follow these rules. The problem with these rules, these big rules that the federal government comes up with for private businesses, is that they're very expensive. An example would be classification system for your information. To have a classification system where everything that you produce has a clearance level or a security classification, it's really expensive. We have to hire people to monitor and put security labels or classification labels on every document in the system. Most businesses don't have the resources to do that, but the federal government does. So we get into some problems sometimes when small businesses need to use, the security systems of the federal government because they're pretty costly. The federal government doesn't have, they haven't had a budget in like 15 years. So they just keep spending. Companies can't usually do that, right? Typically. These are some key laws that apply to the Department of Defense. We need to know the Paperwork Reduction Act of 1995. That has implications where what they want them to do is to digitize stuff or make it electronic. So you see a lot of the agencies now where you can do request or fill out information, or think about the IRS. What big changes came, back in the 90s that allowed us to do our taxes and submit them online, right? Before that, we had to send in a paper form to do our taxes every year. Now we've got this electronic thing. We can, download TurboTax and submit our taxes and get our tax return back in a couple of weeks. so it doesn't have to go through the mail, and we don't have to pay people to open up the mail, scan it in, put it back into the computer. So when you think of the Paperwork Reduction Act, think of taxes. What are EHAs? What is that? Let's see. Oh, electronic health records. Yeah. Um, uh, we've got a degree program in informatics that is underneath the coding department at Pitt. We used to own the informatics thing, and I actually did an open EMR. Let's see. I'll share this with you. Let's see. Let's share my browser too. Okay. So let's see. It's called Open EMR. Uh, Here it is. So it's an open source, free electronic medical records program, and it's web based. Um, so you can download this. Here's a demo of it. All right. So the username is admin, the password is pass. Okay. So this is a scheduling system, for a medical practice. Um, we can see all the patients, right? Your visit. Um, you upload all of the billing codes, and it does your billing, right? Your coding. Um, so CP4. I think I had to load CP10 or something like that, or ICD-10. That new coding stuff they came up with. You have to load those in there, and then you can look for it. You say foot, gives you all the codes, and then you can do your billing. Um, it also has a portal, so your customers can log in and look up their own records and stuff like that. All this EMR is free. It's open source. You can download it as long as you have a Linux box. You can fire it up on there, and people can use it. All right. Um, I think one of the reasons they came out with stuff like this is there was no standardization for EMRs when they first started coming out. And what would happen is the federal government was paying doctors to giving them grants to switch all of their medical records over to electronic, right? So all of these IT people showed up. Oh, we can switch you over. And what they would do is they would write their own EMR, their medical records system, and they would convert all of the stuff for the doctor. The doctor would pay him, $500,000, and then after 5 years, they would go out of business and say, "Oh, we're not supporting our EMR anymore. We can't support you anymore." And then they would open up another business with a different EMR software, and then charge from that system to the other system. So there's a lot of scams and stuff going on. Um, so they came out with this project where you have open source and you have volunteers that write it. Then you can have free clinics, things of that nature, and you'll be able to bill Medicare and stuff like that, and do your medical billing, or track your customers, your clients, your patients, and not have to pay all kinds of money for, like, what is it called? The one they use at the hospital. It's really expensive, and you can't have a login to the system until you go to a training session from the company itself. They've got modules for radiology, all the different departments. Yeah. So one of the things I had to do was find a free copy of the ICD-10 codes because they won't charge you for that. They want you to pay for it. Um, I was able to find on a Medicare website an Excel sheet with all the codes, so I was able to import that into the system. Um, but like you said, this is the electronic medical record system. Um, allows us to do all of that stuff. So this would be another part of the paper reduction act, right? Medicare. They want you to start using less paperwork and convert all of your medical records over electronic. So that's one thing we had to do because of that law. Yeah, it's Epic. That's exactly right. Um, Epic has all these different modules, and they cost a fortune for each module. I think the radiology one is called. It's been so long since I worked with it. Every module has a different name. And then you get into like my wife works at Physicians East, and they use something else. I think they use Centricity or something, which is a GE product. So none of the stuff talks to one another. I mean, there's all kinds of problems. Um, but they really haven't come up with like a standard to allow them to talk to one another. Um, they're starting stuff like that, and I can't remember what it's called, but there's like a language that they're trying to convert all of the medical records over to. And a lady came and she talked about it. Um, but I know people that work at the hospital that just sit there and they monitor the radiography, the x-rays and stuff to see the ones that are rejected by the system. And then they clean up the records and then they try to re-import it. So you have to hire a full-time person to sit there and make sure that the records are compatible with the new system so that they all go together. I can't remember. It's something high seven or high eight. I can't remember the standard, but all of that stuff's in medicine. And when we talk about certification and stuff, I'll tell you about the FDA and pharmaceutical industry. So all of these regulations start up all new industries. These people that have all of this regulation now, we have to, if we want to start a business, we got to pay all these consultants, all these people to come in and do all of this stuff so that we abide by these regulations. So it kind of kills business, but there's a trade-off, right? You might have safe drugs, but it's harder to start a pharmaceutical business because we have to deal with the FDA. So always remember there's, a trade-off for all of this stuff. The Clinger-Cohen Act of 1996 improves acquisitions, use, and disposal of federal IT resources. So guidelines on making sure maybe we destroy or maybe we keep the hard drives when we surplus computers or we sell, we dispose of stuff. I was talking to a guy from the Navy, and he was back in the Navy in the 70s. And what he was telling me was that they used to use those paper punch cards, right? When they used the computers back then. Let's see if I can find pictures of them. Here we go. So when we used to communicate with the computer and program it, this is what the program looked like. And my dad remembers being in college and having to take a class. And he said that people used to carry around these boxes of all of these paper punch cards. And somebody would drop the box and all of the punch cards would get out of order. And they would just scream because they couldn't get it back in order. But if you notice, there is the way that we represented data is that either it's punched or it's not. And what he told me was the holes in the paper in the punch cards was classified. So the air that's in this hole right here is classified. So it was basically classified. It was the air in the hole, right? So that was pretty interesting. He was telling me about that. And then the E-Government Act of 2002 improves the management of electronic government services. That is, like I said, bringing all of the government services to websites so that when they rolled out the Healthcare Act, the American Obamacare, basically, it was all electronic. Right? So they're all about cutting down on waste and using paper. All right. Those are the key laws you're going to have to worry about if you're doing business with the federal government. This Klinger Cohen is going to have to do with what computer systems you buy and how do you use them, right? If you watched the video this week on Enron, I think the Enron video was this week. Let me look. No, WorldCom. There's one that's going to be on Enron coming up. But we talked about Enron and we said it was like one of the biggest accounting scams in history. Out of the Enron scandal came the Sarbanes-Oxley Act. This applies to publicly traded companies. So if you're not on a stock market, you don't have to worry about this law. Only if your company's publicly traded on the stock market. Sole proprietorships, things of that nature don't have to comply with this act. What the act does is it protects investors by requiring accuracy and reliability in corporate disclosures. So this stuff with Enron, where they were inflating their stock prices and they were lying to all the investors about how well the company was doing, and they were hiding their liabilities and sub companies and stuff of that nature. You can't do that anymore. It created new penalties when you do misrepresent. So if you've ever done stuff where you're a stockholder, you'll notice you get a quarterly report, you get an annual report. All of those reports are required by Sarbox. Okay? And if you don't turn in one of those reports, you don't send it to your stockholders, you go to jail. They don't care why. If it's because your servers were in the World Trade Center or World Trade Tower and it got hit by a plane, they don't care. You have to have backups, redundant systems so that you can turn in these reports. Does that make sense? They don't really care why you don't turn it in. They don't care why you get it wrong. These penalties are going to apply. It changes how corporate boards and executives must exchange information and work with corporate auditors. Right? Yep. It's the SEC that monitors this and polices it. The Securities and Exchange Commission. We noticed in Enron that the auditors were working for the company and they were friends with the boards, and the corporate executives were using the company as their own personal piggy bank. They were taking loans from the company, things of that nature. Can't do that anymore, right? What's that called where you mix your money for your company and from your personal finances? You ever hear a term for that? It's called commingling funds. And you can get in a lot of trouble for it, right? If you start a nonprofit or you start a LLC, you need to keep records and separate all that stuff, or you're going to get stung either by the IRS or by other regulations. Right? You can't just go to the corporate bank account and start taking money out. That is unless you're a politician, right? Then you can write bad checks, stuff like that. Nothing happens to you. Anyway, moving on. The Graham-Leach-Bliley Act. They typically call that the GLBA. It has to do with the banks and firms that do retirement funds and stuff like that. It was passed in 1999. It's going to protect your personal financial information. So before this, uh, before this regulation was passed, a bank could sell your personal information to third parties. An example would be somebody would go to a bank. I want to find out everybody at your bank that has more than $500,000 in their account so I can target them with advertising for timeshares or whatever. And the bank can have these agreements where they're selling your information out, right? Making more money just on the information about the people in their bank. They cannot do that anymore. To protect personally identifiable information, GLBA divides privacy requirements into three principal parts: the privacy rule, the safeguards rule, and the pretexting provisions. Right? Privacy rule says who they can disclose information to, very similar to HIPAA, right, for medical records. And then they have to send you a notice. You ever get those things in the mail? These are our privacy annual privacy notice, how we use your information. You have to do that if you're a bank. The safeguards rule says we have to take care of their information and stop people from snooping. So I was talking to a teacher downstairs that teaches economics, and he used to work in a bank. And he said he had a lady working there, and it was the nicest lady you could have ever met. And she was going through a divorce, and she went to peek in her husband's bank account just to see what he was doing with his money. You know, she got canned. You can't do stuff like that. You can't look in other people's records that you don't have if you're not actually helping them, right? Providing a service for the customer. And the safeguards rule has IT implications so that the IT systems run a report and tell on you if you go into other people's accounts. Same thing with HIPAA. If my wife goes into somebody else's medical records and she hasn't been involved in their care, or they haven't had a visit in 6 months, or they don't have an appointment, the IT system is going to flag that access and tell the administrator, and then they're going to go do an investigation. Does that make sense? So that would be the safeguards rule. It protects against people snooping and accessing information they have no business accessing. And then pretexting provisions. Let's see. So does anybody know what pretexting is? You ever heard of pretexting before? It seemed like it was pretty difficult to me when I was studying the Security Plus stuff to figure out what pretexting was. And the thing I had in my mind was you falsely represent yourself as somebody else, kind of like impersonating a police officer, right? That's against the law. But impersonating a UPS driver is not, right? So these pretexting provisions make it a crime to falsely represent yourself to a bank to get information. Private investigators do it a lot, right? They call the bank. They're like, yeah, this is Mr. So-and-so. And then they say, well, what's your social security number? Well, he has a social security number. Well, what's this and what's that? He's got all this information, and he pretends like he's another person to get bank information about somebody. Right? That is illegal now. Never used to be snooping and stuff like that, but now it is. Let me pull up the book. Will you explain it better than I did? All right. I have a hard time on this Mac zooming in. Usually I could use the wheel on a Windows box. Let me stop using a Mac. I know. Let's see. Pretexting is a method of social engineering. So just think of social engineering when it's more about human interaction and about you must manipulate others to divulge sensitive information. The root of pretexting is that the pretext or the situation or the reason that you're trying to get the situation is false, right? For example, investigators often use pretexting. Um, Consider how to guess a password. You might use some programmatic mechanism. Um, so calling on the phone and saying, I'm from the IT department. I need to reset your password. What's your old password so I can reset it for you is an example of pretext. Um, Going to the Goodwill store across from the school. There are a lot of uniforms over there. UPS uniforms, FedEx uniforms. I got some IBM shirts over there. We've got ECU coaching staff shirts, all kinds of stuff. Going over there, buying one of those outfits, and then coming into a business, and just by people looking at you and seeing IBM on your shirt, they're going to assume that you work for IBM. So that would be an example of pretexting. You are misrepresenting yourself. You're not even speaking, but you wearing a uniform like that is going to make people think that you work for the delivery company or something, right? They said a clipboard will get you in more places than anything else. Carry around a clipboard, right? All right. So it's illegal to do the following: make false, fictitious, or fraudulent statements to obtain customer information from the financial institution or from its customers, or use forged, counterfeit, lost, or stolen documents to obtain customer information from the financial institution. So you can pretext anybody else, but if you walk in a bank and do it, then you can go to jail for it. Does that make sense? All right. All right. Go back to the slideshow. So that's the GLBA that does that. So we need to know that. So we've talked about Starbucks, we've talked about FSMA, and then this is GLBA. HIPAA. Right? HIPAA. Okay? Hippo has two P's, HIPAA does not. A lot of people accidentally put two P's in there. This stands for the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act of 1996. I miss the words a lot too. I think I usually say Health Information Privacy and Portability Act or something. I say it wrong too. Right? So it's very common. What HIPAA does is it helps citizens maintain health insurance coverage. Right? Yeah. Bengals. Is that a football team? I haven't seen the Bengals in a long time. They still play? I know they changed all of the names of a lot of the clubs and moved them around and stuff like that. Maybe they're just in a different conference. I don't watch a lot of football. Maybe they're just in a different conference or something. I don't know. Boomer, right? Boomer Esiason was in the Bengals or something. I can't remember. Anyway, a long time ago. I don't pay attention to football that much. It improves the efficiency and effectiveness of the healthcare system. Like we were saying about the medical records, switching all that stuff over to an EMR cuts down on paper, increases security from people breaking into offices and going through papers or getting into filing cabinets. And we can also encrypt stuff, right? Too, also, right? So it also makes the records accessible. So if I'm on vacation and I need my medical records, my doctor's office can transmit them quickly. They don't have to scan them in and do things like that. It also works to protect the privacy and security of health information. There are financial penalties for noncompliance. The biggest is you cannot process Medicare, Medicaid patients. So if you get paid by the federal government for patients, then they're going to stop paying you when you violate this HIPAA law. All right, so this is important. These are the two big parts of HIPAA. There's a privacy rule and a security rule. Privacy rule dictates who I can give the information to. And basically, I can legally give the information to anybody who is giving you service or treating you, right? So like from a doctor's office to a hospital or a hospital to a clinic, that's okay. As long as they're involved in your care, you can transmit the information to them. That's the privacy rule. And there's these terms in there, and we're going to do research on them later on in the course about covered entity. What is a covered entity? I think it's the next chapter. We're going to have to look all of that stuff up, right? I think we're also answering some questions about that in the work this week. Right? The security rule is different, right? Security rule has to do with the mechanisms to protect our information. And like I said, the flagging access to records, how I transmit the data, the information has to be encrypted. That is to do with the security rule. So privacy is who I can give it to. Security is basically the method in which I secure it. I was talking to Cheryl. You might have taken Security 110 with her. Cheryl Godwin. She used to be the IT manager for Lenore Hospital. And, HIPAA was out, all this stuff was going on, and there was a big market for software that was HIPAA compliant. They've also got other regulatory bodies such as JCO that will inspect a hospital. So they've got a bunch of different things they need to make, people they need to make happy, right? The hospital. Anyway, this company was giving her some software to transmit medical records, and they said they were HIPAA compliant. And they said, are you, is all the information encrypted? And the people said, oh yeah, everything's encrypted. So she didn't actually believe them. Well, she believed them. She just didn't take their word for it. She fired up Wireshark and put it on her connection and looked at the transfer of the medical records. When she did, she found out that the username and password was sent in clear text, just like a FTP connection for this secure software. She actually checked it out, right? So she found that out. She called him and she said, look, I put your software in and I tested it, and it's transmitting stuff in clear text, They said, well, we have our software in 500 hospitals. Nobody else has complained. So they had to fix it. You should check and make sure, right? So when we have liability, when we go to court, we have the rule. What's the reasonable person rule? Where you have I can't remember now. Due diligence and due diligence and not due process. I can't remember it. One is that I'm doing everything a reasonable person would do to secure the information I'm checking out. I'm not trusting other people. I think that's due diligence. And then the other one, to do care. All right, due care, due diligence. Due care is that I'm protecting your information that a reasonable person would the measures a reasonable person would do to take care of your car or your information. So if I was a mechanic and I put your tire on, and you drive off from my mechanic shop, and I didn't put the half of the lugs on your tire, and your tire rolls off of your car and you crash, and you sue me, when I get to court, there's going to be a burden to prove that I had due care, that I did what a reasonable mechanic would do when I put your tire on, and a reasonable mechanic would not leave half the lugs off, so I'd be liable for that. So that's called the due care rule. Due diligence is that you did what a reasonable person would do to check out to ensure people's information was protected. So if her hospital got hauled into court, she'd be on the hook for due diligence, right? That she didn't check to make sure. So watch out for stuff like that. But yeah, she told me that she put Wireshark on there, and the software wasn't doing what it said it would do. Pretty scary. Children's Internet Protection Act. I've also heard that COPA. This says SIPA. It attempts to prevent children from being exposed to explicit content in schools and libraries. They have to put software on the computers to make sure that porno doesn't come up in the children's library. My daughter goes to school, and they have something called Bloxy on her laptop that blocks inappropriate content. I would think it would be pretty difficult to do that. I mean, the porno people want their porn to get around to everybody, get around firewalls, get around all of that stuff. They don't want to be limited. So I'm sure it's a cat and mouse game, them trying to get past these firewalls at libraries and content filters. It protects our children from exposure to offensive internet content, and you should adopt and enforce a policy to monitor the online activities of minors to make sure they're not accessing that stuff. Here it is. So the CIPA is the content filtering stuff. The COPPA has to do with gathering information on the internet. If you're a website, you cannot collect information from anybody under the age of 13. I'm sure you've seen it on gaming websites. What's your birthday? Right? The gaming website wants to show you a video of game footage of some game they wrote. It'll say, "What's your birthday?" And you tell them your birthday, and they say, "Well, you can't access this." Right? Or you open up an Apple iCloud account. I had to open up an iCloud account for my daughter so I could set up her iPad so that we can share music and stuff like that. I put her birth date in there. It deactivates most of the features on the iCloud that she can get into trouble with, and it doesn't collect any information from her, right? So it's illegal to do that. And you can't say, "Well, I didn't know they were under 13." You have to have mechanisms in place to stop them, right, from giving out their information. You need to notify parents directly before collecting personal information from kids. Get parents' verifiable consent before collecting information from kids. Just don't collect information from kids. Don't make kids your market. They really don't have any money. I know they tell their parents to buy stuff. Just don't get involved in it. You'll get in trouble. Educational institutions have to comply with FERPA. That would include Pitt Community College. FERPA says that you have the right to inspect and review all of student records. Anything we keep on you, we need to show you. You have a right to ask for correction of records. And then all kinds of different permissions, right? Parental written permission required to give out any kind of information. Right? You'll keep seeing a term come up, PII, personally identifiable information. So any information in that record that somebody can use to point back to you as a person needs to be stripped out of any kind of HIPAA or FERPA or any of this information we send out. right? So I can send records from a health provider to the, what is it, the FDA or centers, the CDC. I can send out reports about diseases that I see in my clinic. I cannot send information about the patients that lets the CDC identify any particular patient. So what I have to do is sanitize those records and take anything out. Basically, I can say, this is the number of patients I saw with COVID, and this was their ages. I can't give phone numbers. I can't give addresses. That would enable them to point back to me. So what I have to do is, before I put any information out and I share information, statistical information, I need to pull all that PII out. I mean, I had trouble with this last semester. Since most of our, well, um, unless they're like a high school student taking classes, they're all over 18. And I get parents all, um, is Billy coming to class? um, I pay his rent and I'm paying his tuition. Is he coming to class? I'm like, I can't. Because of FERPA, I can't say, well, yeah, he's coming to class, about his grade or anything like that. I need a release form. Just like I have a HIPAA release form, I have a FERPA release form at Pitt that tells me that I can discuss a student's records with their parents. Does that make sense? So it's very similar. The differences between FERPA and HIPAA, one has to do with schools, one has to do with healthcare. FERPA really doesn't have any teeth. Okay. HIPAA, you go to jail, they pay fines. FERPA, basically, they'll cut off federal funding of the school. If the school's not enforcing FERPA, then they won't allow them to take student aid anymore. So that's the strings they use to control that we don't give out this information. One thing says that we can't use your social security number for anything, right? So we can't. People used to use social security numbers for accounts, like your username would be your social security number. They would use the last 4 of your social security number. They can't do that stuff anymore with educational institutions. They've even gone to lengths to say that we can't use your student ID for anything. If you can use it, like we can't publish your student ID if we use it for your password, right? So there's all kinds of rules and restrictions for FERPA and the way we handle your student records. All right, so this is that certification and credit. According to FSMA, there's a process of auditing systems before putting them into production. Why care about audits after the system's been running for 10 years, giving out information? So, certification means I'm going to take the computer and verify that it's fit to process federal information. Okay? It makes sure that there's put in the system in, I know. You said you'd be a ECU in the 1990s was your student ID number. I went to Pitt in 95 and I still have my ID card. It has my social security number typed on the front of it on my ID card. So you go to the movies, are you a student for a discount ticket? Yeah, here. I had my social security number on it. So I still have the card. I've just blotted out the social security number on it. But yeah, they were using it a lot back then. Right. Okay. So when I'm talking about certification, think of FDA, right? My dad is a biochemist, works for the FDA, worked over at Metrics in Greenville. And there used to be this guy that would come in. He owned his own business. And I think it's called Title 11, Title 12. He would come in and he would have to certify their computers before they used the computers to do their experiments. They had these big machines called, I think it's high some high temperature chromatograph machines where they could burn up stuff, and the stuff that they light that it gives off when they burn it up tells them what's in it. So a piece of food, I'm going to find out what's in the food. I'd put it in an HPLC machine, burn it up, and it would measure it, right? So they had to do that with drugs. They had to find out what was in the drugs. They had it hooked up to a computer, a Windows computer, and the guy had to come in and certify that computer before they could use it. And the guy would charge them like thousands of dollars to certify the computer, right? And that computer recorded everything that machine did, and it stopped them from falsifying data, right? So one of the scientists comes in, he decides he wants to put Yahoo Instant Messenger or whatever, Instant Messenger on the box. He puts it on there. All of a sudden, the machine's out of spec, and it's not certified anymore. They got to pay the guy to come back and recertify the machine again. Another $1,000. The hard drive dies in it, has to be reformatted, has to be certified again. So there's a whole industry set up just to certify these computers. And what it does is it ensures that the system isn't set up so that the pharmaceutical companies can cheat, right? Every time they use the HPLC machine, it records. And you can't stop it from recording, right? So you can't run an experiment 5 times and get one result that you like and show that to the FDA. They know that you're running it 5 times and you're picking the most favorable one, right? That's an example of this certification. We're going to make sure the system's right. Remember last chapter, risk management framework. You have a risk management cycle. You have continuous monitoring. You're building security into the planning and system life cycle. Right. It makes it a strategy for the company. Right. So just remember, we have the risk management from last chapter going on. We saw this steps for the risk management. I categorize it, right? High value, low value. I select my controls. Remember, controls are anything that reduces risk. I implement the controls. I assess the controls. I authorize the system, and then I monitor it. And then I have a cycle. I do this over and over and over again to make the system more secure. Right? We don't need to go over that again. We went over last chapter. PCI DSA. DSS, not a law or regulation. This is the set of rules that are set into effect by Visa, MasterCard, American Express. It's a set of requirements that prescribe operational and technical controls to protect cardholder data. So, while I'm talking about this, come back and look at this when you're doing that project from chapter 1. This is what we're talking about, what we were interested in that case project. The requirements follow security best practices and use 12 high-level requirements aligned across 6 goals. And you'll actually see that in the assignment. I ask you for the 6 goals and the 12 requirements. You need to look that stuff up. You have an assessment that is typically required every year. It's a self-assessment. You get a number of credit cards per year, then you have to pay an outside company to come do it. You need to fix stuff, and then you need to report. There's reporting that you have to do. That report is the self-assessment, and then typically you have to have an outside company come and assess also. So you can look up all that stuff when you start requiring it. The principles are build and maintain a secure network. Install a firewall. You have to have a firewall. It doesn't tell you which firewall. It doesn't tell you how the firewall has to be set up. It says have a firewall. Don't use default passwords. These are pretty common sense ideas, right? Don't use the default password for your ATM machine. Did you know that all of the ATM machines use the same key? The ones in the gas stations? Unless you pay an extra $100 and upgrade the lock, all of the ATM machines that are in the gas stations, the little ones, use the same key. So you can go in there, put the key in, and open it up, take the money out of it. They also have vendor-supplied passwords that you can get into those ATMs with. I did a search on the internet for passwords, and it was like the first Excel sheet that came up All of these passwords for ATM machines. Protect the cardholder data. Protect stored cardholder data, and then encrypt it when you transmit it. All right. That's pretty simple stuff. I also put at the bottom here. You need to protect, right? The cardholder's name, the expiration date, the chip information, the card verification value that's on the back of it. You have to protect that. The stuff that's on the stripe, magnetic stripe. PCI DSS prescribes exactly how you're supposed to store that stuff. You don't store it together, and you don't keep it in clear text. Let's see if they have a picture. Basically the same stuff we were talking about. All right.
Those who are authorized to use it.
All right. All right. Maintain a vulnerability management program. That's that risk cycle that we just looked at. Make sure your software is up to date. Use strong access control measures. Don't let the password come up on your employees' screens, right? Just like you don't let the social security number come up on the employees' screens. When I open up your record inside my system, I might see the last 4 of your social, but I don't see the whole thing. Back a long time ago, it used to show me an entire social security number when I open up your record at Pitt. And how many people have taken classes at Pitt? Probably everybody in Pitt County. At one time or another, went to community college, took a continuing ed class. Right? So all of that stuff was in our database. Assign a unique ID to each person with computer access. Right? So don't share accounts. Restrict the physical access to the cardholder data environment. So don't have a closet in a mop closet in the back with your servers in there. Right? We need to have a server room. Track and monitor all access to the network, test your security, maintain policies. Oh, that's 6, right? And then each one's broken down, and there's your 12. So read these requirements and principles off of these slides for your project. This is the answer to one of the questions. So these are the laws that we need to know, right? We need to know, let's see, we went over FSMA, right? We went over GLBA. We went over SARBOX. We went over PCI DSS. All of those things we need to know if we're going to do business in the United States. All right. So that's the end of the slideshow. Does anybody have any questions about or stuff about the assignments this week? So we actually have stuff to do this week besides a quiz. So make sure you take a look at that. Continue to work on your project, your first case project, and I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording. I'm going to post this recording in case you want to come back and look at it while you're doing your work.